Welcome back, the final episode in the How to Build a Versailles Planter series. Today we're going to glue these things up and get the job finished. If that sounds good, stick around. So we're now at the stage where all the parts are done, all the joinery is done, everything's sanded down to about 180 grit, and you put finish on the appropriate parts. What we mean by appropriate parts is I put finish into the groove where the panel's going to go. I've give those parts that are going to be hard to reach when we've got the final assembly done. I've coated the cross pieces the same way, the channels and the hard to reach parts, and our panels are all nicely coated as well. And if you're interested, it's this Ronseal Willow Garden paint. What I like about that particular paint is it soaks into the wood. It feels more like a stain than a traditional paint. So it's not sitting on top of the surface that can lead to chips and peels. It really gets down into the pores of the wood and it gives a really nice smooth finish. And there's no need for primers or sealers. Two coats straight onto the bare wood gives you a beautiful finish. Sand down between coats, say 180 grit is good. Now whichever finish you're using, it's important that you don't get the finish down inside the mortices. Not sure if you can see, but my mortises inside there are still nice and clean. And similarly on my tenons are still clean as well. If you do get it wrong with this type of paint, it's not too much of a problem because the glue will adhere to the paint. If you are using a finish, especially oil-based finish, that becomes critical. And if you're using any other type of paint that sits on the surface, also it's critical that you keep those clean. So you should be at the stage where you've got a couple of coats of finish on, everything's laid up, everything's rubbed down, and we are ready to do the glue. Now we're going to do the glue up in subsection. So we're going to glue up the two sides, let that go off, and then bring the two sides together to complete the container. So I've got the parts laid out. These are all the ones that we tuned earlier on, so I know that they're good. I've got my usual damp cloth. I've got my lolly stick for spreading glue. I've got my glue box with some glue inside it. And as always, I'm using Titebond 3 exterior and interior glue. And I've got a couple of clamps that are already sized to give me the right sort of fit. In addition, I've cut down some scrap pieces of wood to give me 4 cawls because I don't want to damage this outside of the material. And with that said, we're now good to go. Now if you remember the episode, I think it was the last one where I glued up the panels, I had a comment back saying, can I just give you a close-up of how much glue I actually use on a joint? So we're going to look at that now. What I'm looking for on a glue joint is a nice thin opaque layer. And I just want to be able to see the grain poking through the wood or showing through the wood. And I'm just looking for that nice opaque layer. If you get too much on this, obviously it doesn't matter overly, it will just give you a messy squeeze out. If you get that nice opaque layer, you're going to get a good strong joint with minimum clean out. So that's what I'm looking for, it's that nice opaque layer where I can still see the grain coming through there, but I've got an even coat of glue all the way around. And I also do the same inside the joint itself. Again, just looking for that nice opaque layer all the way around. Like so. The same on this one. Now I just noticed on this glue up, because the clamping pressure is towards the bottom, it's just twisting these top joints ever so slightly. So I'm just going to come in and counteract that with another clamp, because I don't want this frame to be twisted. That's better. Cool. Now, even though we had that thin opaque layer, you can just see the smallest amount of squeeze out on this bottom joint. So just making sure that's nice and clean. Oh, I'll just check the side. That looks good. Nice and clean joints. And the final thing is just check we're square. And that's good. So I'll go ahead and glue the other sub-assemblies up, and then we'll let the glue go off for a few hours. We'll come back together and do the final glue up. I'll see you in a minute. Looking good. So we now have all the sub-assemblies glued up, and hopefully you can see these joints are really nice and tight. And can you see this nice crisp line here at the bottom and all around the sides? And that's what I was looking for, and one of the reasons that we painted the panels on the sides before we did that part of the assembly. The other reason, of course, is that this panel here is going to expand and contract. So if you assemble this and then paint it, as this contracts, you'll end up with a white line around the edges here where the untreated part comes out of these panels. So this way you get maximum weather protection and you get that really neat, professional looking finish. Good. And it was at this point that the microphone decided to die, so apologies for that. Lay out all my panels, the two sub-assemblies, the cross members and the two end panels. Exactly the same technique as before. We applied glue to the four mortices, and then we just spread that glue around to make sure that everything's nice and translucent, and I can see the grain through the glue. Then take the cross members, put the glue on the tenons, once again spreading that around with my lolly stick, again looking for that translucent layer that I know is going to give me a good joint but minimise overall squeeze out. Then it's simply a matter of pushing the two parts together, making sure that tenon is firmly seated in the mortise, repeating for the other side, and sliding the panel home, making sure of course it's orientated in the right direction. Easy to get this wrong at this point. Then it's simply a matter of repeating for the other side, the two cross members and the centre panel. I now applied glue to all four tenons on the top. Use the lolly stick to spread the glue around, making sure I get that nice, consistent, translucent layer we've discussed. Apply glue to the remaining four mortises on the other panel. Spread that round with a lolly stick, and then it's time to fit the top to the base. Carefully line the joints up, knock those into position, and then just simply with hand force just make sure everything's nicely seated. With everything nicely seated, we can now bring the clamps in to put some clamping pressure on this thing to allow it to dry. Note the position of the clamp, it's at the top of the legs and it's in the centre of the legs. The reason I'm doing it this way is I want to make sure that we get good consistent force throughout the crosspiece. If you clamp at the side at this point, then you're going to put twist into the frame and we don't want that. We have the final clamps, we bring up consistent clamping pressure just to bring the frame into square, make sure everything's nice and tight, make sure everything's seated, clean all the joints off, and that's it. That's the planter clamped together. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other two, and then we'll come back together, hopefully with a working microphone, and then we'll look at the next steps, which is the final coat of finish. See you in a minute. So microphone's working again. You'd be pleased to know it was a battery related problem, so nothing too sinister. Anyway, they're all glued up now, out of their clamps and looking quite good. What I like about this stage is how consistent everything is. All the same size, all nice and square, all look the same. And by batching it out in the way that we have done to make 3 containers, they're the results that you get. Final job is to put the finish on it. A quick sanding and then a coat of paint, a light sanding and then another coat of paint, and the job's a good one. I'm going to use the Festool Random Orbit sander for this job. I'm going to come in with an 80 grit, then I'll do a 120 grit, and then I'll do a final 180 grit, and then we'll apply the coat of paint. Let's get going. Okay, so everything is now sanded down to 180 and we can go ahead and put the finish on these. And there you go, 3 Versailles containers with their first coat of paint on. So I'll let these dry out for probably 2 or 3 hours, really let it soak in, let that begin to harden. I'll rub it down with a 180 grit paper, this time just using hand sanding, very, very fine, not using the electrical device at that point, and give it its final coat, and that's the job done. So that's where we're going to leave it. I hope you found this useful. As always, the plans are available, they're out on the website now. You'll get the usual disclaimer. You'll then get this sheet here that will take you through the materials that we need, the sizes you need to buy, the quantities, and then the cutout list so you understand what you need to cut out where. And then we'll go step by step through, so we'll look at the overall container, we'll look at the legs that we did in episode 1, we'll go through the rails that we did and the final panels, and also a convenient empty page on the back for you to take your own notes on. You can get the plans over at the website www.thewoodgrafter.com. Look on the top menu for the community page, click on that, scroll down the page underneath the form, and there you'll see the videos and also the plans for these containers. Let me know what you think in the comments. Has this been a useful series? Did you enjoy it? How are you building these? And if you are building them, drop me a picture. I'd love to see what you're doing and we can share that on future episodes. See you next time with a brand new project.